Chris Palmisano and I sit down to talk about a number of topics. We start by discussing his weight loss during COVID and then jump into business. We discuss the state of Google innovation, how his company was compromised, and how GIS is evolving. Chris and I also discuss how being in venture financing affects his decision-making as a CEO and how he leads his team. Now please meet Chris Palmisano. Hello and welcome to the Arsenic Show. Today I have Chris Palmisano. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How are you, Robert?
I am doing amazing. Welcome to the studio. Probably should have had you on earlier.
It's a great studio. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again in person.
I know.
You know, the world's still somewhat, believe it or not, opening up again.
I know. It is odd.
It's extremely odd.
I feel like I talk to you somewhat regularly, but I haven't seen you in, I don't know. It's been a long time.
It's been too long.
Yeah, too long.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, first of all, you look great.
Thank you.
You've been working out, I can tell.
A little bit.
So tell me all about it.
Well, you know, coming out of COVID, like most people, spent most of the time indoors. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? I had turned 40 during COVID, and I said on the back end of that, like, okay, I'm going to really take charge of my health and get back in shape, get to a really, really good place. And I put myself on a bit of a program and went for it. Mm-hmm. I've got a routine. I think routines are really important. Mm-hmm. And so almost every morning I do something, whether that's hit the trail, and we got the beautiful Town Lake, or Lady Bird Lake Trail down here, and I don't live far from it. Mm-hmm. And so that's a nice feature to have here. And so everybody ought to take advantage of it. I try to. So I'll either hit the trail and go for a run or go for a walk. And then a couple times a week, I'll hit the gym also. And then I think a big part of staying healthy, getting healthy and maintaining your health is what you eat. And I don't go overboard. I'm not a vegan.
What were you eating before that you're not eating now?
Well, so I cut out like fast food. And you know what I think I really had prior was like almost an unhealthy relationship with food, where like stress eating or eating out all the time, not really paying attention to what I was ordering. And I found myself weighing more than I should for my frame and my size. And I just wanted to do something about it. And there's nothing like turning 40 to give you a good kick in the rear to get it in gear or to get things in order if they weren't in order before. And so, I took a little pride in it, and I've been hard at it for the last 18 months or so. And maintaining a healthy weight.
It shows.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, noticeable.
I mean, it's like anything else. Like if you don't measure it, you might not manage it as well as you could. Mm-hmm. So I've got a scale, a Wi-Fi scale, and that's connected to, I bought a lifetime subscription to an app that allows me to track lose it, if anybody cares, track all the calories and track your weight. And I'm pretty religious about it. So, a technique that I picked up on is you don't have to log all the time. Why most people fall off the wagon, or why they essentially give up on dieting or give up on trying to get back in shape or trying to lose weight, is because of the tediousness of it and the discipline that it requires. What I tell people is do it until you get where you want to be, and then you can stop tracking. And then just monitor your weight. And if it's up a little bit, well, then track it until you get back down into the zone that you want to stay at, and do it that way. That way you don't have to do it all the time. Only do it when there's an issue or when there's a problem. And that's worked out pretty well for me. At one point I was, I've lost close to 35 pounds. So,
wow.
From a peak, which I never should have let myself get to that point anyway, but life happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, I never thought you were particularly overweight to begin with.
No,
no,
definitely not too far overweight. But
sure.
You go to the doctor and they'll tell you anything like you're overweight.
You definitely are.
And then they weigh you, and you get on the scale, and you're wearing shoes and clothes, and you've got Like I joke, like I told the doctor, I said, why don't you let me grab the iPad and put the iPad up to my ear like it's a phone? And I got a jacket on and keys and like a bunch of stuff in the pockets, and like, what are we doing here?
The same thing happened to me. I was at the doctor a couple of weeks ago, and I literally probably had over a pound worth of random crap in my pocket. I'm like, this isn't accurate at all.
No,
not
not
including
at all.
my shoes and jacket and everything else.
Yeah.
It was cold that day. So yeah.
And that's your weight. They're
Yeah,
like,
that's my
oh,
weight.
that's your weight, Robert.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, wait a minute. No, it's not.
And I know that they messed this up because I was at the doctor before that, and I said, actually, I probably have about 1.5 pounds worth of stuff total on my body at the moment. She's like, oh, I'll just mark it down 1.5 pounds. So now the one nurse did it and the other one did it.
One didn't,
and so,
yeah. And then it looks different.
Yeah, it looks different.
Yeah. Well, and then there's one other thing that I do every year. In January, I think is a really nice like trigger. I'm not a big believer in the New Year's resolution, but if you need to do something, you should. If you need to do something, you should do it now.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't necessarily wait until some magical date in the future. But January is a nice like reminder that for something new that you need to do or something routine that you need to do. So I use January every year to like, okay, it's January. I'm going to go to the doctor, go to the dentist, go to the eye doctor, whatever, and check in on all those things and do it in January and get it over with. Mm-hmm. And then you're done for the year.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's worked really, really well for me. And I share it with a lot of people. And I think several of my friends have said, yeah, I do the same thing now. And so if the clock ticks over to January.
Kind of is a New Year's resolution-ish. I mean,
it's not a resolution.
Yeah, I know.
I've been doing it every year. But January is this like, it's a nice like demarcation line. Sure. Okay, something new. Yeah. Or actually a trigger to start a routine is probably better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I actually do use New Year's resolutions, but I'm not fanatical about it. Usually, before when I was younger, I had nothing close to a SMART goal. I'm like, just be happier or something dumb,
Yeah.
And now I actually do I usually have like a little mini project that I've been kind of waiting on doing, and I'm like, okay, this year I'm just going to finish this project.
Sure.
I've been thinking about it for a while. It's a problem. I just need to get it done. This year, something you might be interested in. A friend of a friend had this document that he wrote that basically described how he wanted to be like his operating system, like how to interact with him kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. And at first I thought it was very pompous and kind of lame, but then I read it and it's really just kind of more like, if you're confused why I'm acting the way I'm acting, it's because I'm expecting you to talk to me in this way. Mm-hmm. And so that's, again, I feel like fairly pompous but still interesting. And so I was like, I wonder what would happen if I wrote a similar document, except instead of a user guide, it would just be more like what I am like as a boss, So if I have a bunch of employees or people who dotted line into me, what kind of things do I expect out of them? What kind of things do I, how do I like things delivered to me as a report, as opposed to, you come up to me like, I want to do blah, blah, blah. It's like, great. Why? And they're like, well, I want to. It's like that. No, sorry. You got to give me some of my data. I need to see why you come up with this thesis. Like what, and then we can fight about it. And then not because I'm trying to get you fired, not because I'm trying to get rid of you. I'm not trying to tell you you're stupid, although you might be. I'm just trying to say that maybe the idea you have could be honed, or maybe it's terrible and we should not do it. And so I ended up writing it more just for myself than anything.
Sure.
It was really interesting to kind of know my own mind a little bit better. So I don't know. I think a New Year's resolution of just finishing a project was actually kind of useful for me.
Yeah, it can be. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so you're referring to, I've heard that called a user manual.
Yeah. The original, how it came to me was, it was a user interface guide, or a user guide, I think is what it's called. But I really didn't like the connotation of someone using me. It seemed a little like not quite. Yeah. So, but it is sort of like how to interface with me. You know, it's like we are two sort of like disparate systems trying to communicate together, and we don't quite speak the same language. We're trying to figure out each other, black box. And here's some commands that actually work on my operating system.
Sure.
Like I hear this might help,
Yeah. Well, it was somewhat of a popular concept at Google.
Yeah,
some managers would write one. It was called the user manual. And as far as I know, one of the senior most execs had written one, and basically said, this is how you best work with me or interact with me. And it just makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Like, hey, if you have some self-awareness, I think it makes a ton of sense.
Correct. You actually have to know yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And the reason I went down this path is I noticed, I think some people think I'm a pretty aggressive person in the workplace. I use the Socratic method. I'm like, that idea is bad. And unless you can tell me why it's good, we probably shouldn't do it. And here's why I think it's bad. And here's all the reasons you could do this better and blah, 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 blah. And people are like, wow, that guy hates me. I'm like, I don't hate you. You came up with an interesting idea. It's just not a good idea.
Right.
And it got the conversation going. And now we've moved past it to a better idea. To me, that's all upside. There's nothing down at all. But I noticed that people were like, wow, that guy, wow. And very intimidated by me, probably for a wide variety of reasons, actually.
Sure.
But, I'm highly placed in the company and
right.
A hacker and all this other stuff that they're worried about me, but really it's just trying to get the best answer. And so that was my impetus for maybe it's useful for other people to know that I'm not going to get them fired. This isn't going to their boss.
Right. So you practice the Socratic method then. Is that your like essentially default style as you're managing people or just working in general?
I think so. I think it's effective.
Sure.
I think it works.
Socrates did it.
Yeah. If it's good enough for Socrates, that guy, he's smelled bad and he yelled at people. It's kind of my spirit animal. But I think that the reason I like it is the best idea wins.
Sure.
I've always been about the best idea winning. I don't need to be right. I need someone to be right. And
that's well said.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'll beat up your idea until you're right. Or I want you to beat up my idea until you've proven me right or wrong. And I don't care which. I mean, I prefer to be right, but I'm not going to.
Right.
I'm not going to get in the way of my pride's not going to get in the way. I'm going to go, interesting. Yes,
sure.
I think you're right about that. Let me rephrase everything I just said in context of your better idea. And we move forward.
Well, that's healthy. And if you're hiring good people, that's their job is to come up with great ideas and then to challenge yours.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to be what do they say? You don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you might want to
find a better room.
Find a different room.
Yeah.
And I believe that too. Absolutely.
That is actually what this room is. This is me trying to bring in my smart people friends and get them to tell me why I'm an idiot about whatever it is. And okay, so we have a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
But first I want to talk a little bit. You kind of had a kind of interesting trajectory. You started off as a Marine and you got all the way to being an executive. So can you give us a little bit about that sort of path that you took?
Yeah, sure. So I went to college on an ROTC scholarship, basically. I knew I wanted to go into the military and I didn't really know the right path, and went to see the recruiter and we talked about all the different options, and that actually worked out really well for me. But then I was a senior when 9/11 happened. And so everybody that year, of course, and there was, I think, a book written about the West Point class. I wasn't in the Army, but they called it like the class that went to war. And virtually everybody I know that graduated in that time frame, 2001, 2002, and then since then, in a lot of ways, almost probably since then, went somewhere and did something. Iraq or Afghanistan or one of the 5 or 6 other places that there were things going on around the world, some on the books, some off the books. So just about everybody went somewhere and did something, myself included. I went to Iraq in 2005 and eventually made my way out of the service and got married and started a business career. And there's something of I would call it a cottage industry of like recruitment firms and specialists that help the military folks land jobs, like whether it's in corporate America or elsewhere. And then since then, I've been interested, and I've basically been following opportunities and pursuing things that I was interested in or that I was excited about. I've had exposure in several different industries, which has, I think, been beneficial. So you learn, you can see what's happening in one domain and then see if you can apply that in another, have some sense of what's happening on a broader scale. And then I did a few things like sort of halfway through, I went back to school. And then on the back end of that, went to work at Google. And then that's actually how I got to Austin. And that was a little over 11 years ago. And we've been here ever since. And then Austin has this allure with the technology community. And after a while, Most people, I think, get an itch or an inkling, and you want to scratch that itch and see what being an entrepreneur or the startup community is all about. And so at some point,
only if you're totally insane, which apparently you and I are both.
Oh, there are days, right? There are days where you're like, what in the world? So it does take it is a leap of faith in a lot of ways. And I think anybody that denies that is crazy. But you could also argue that anybody that does this is a little bit crazy anyways.
I think it's a strong argument.
Yeah, for sure. But that's a lot of what's here. And I also tell people that are like thinking about careers and career management, and I've done quite a bit of mentoring in that area, but like there's a couple strategies. So you can go into something like a specific function, like I'm going to be a finance guy. And then in that case, maybe the best place is New York or San Francisco or somewhere else. And then you follow wherever the company sends you. This is kind of an older, maybe something of a more traditional way of thinking. Or you can plant yourself someplace and say, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have available to me here, or with what I can create here. We got to Austin and then just decided to stay here. And that's something of a forcing function or a binding constraint, if you will, and say, okay, well, let's see what we can do while we're here. And then since then, it's gotten a lot easier to work remotely or work from afar, or
which cuts your costs way down as well.
Yeah, well, cuts costs down, but it also means like if you're firmly planted someplace, you might not necessarily need to move.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do need to be willing to accept essentially the trade-offs or the consequences. In some cases, you take the good with the bad. I mean, that's just life.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of sales guys who were forced to be at home with their wives for the first time in a long time. They're like, oh, like, how do I get back on the road?
Yeah, for sure.
Like itchy. Like.
Well, and then you're like, you almost don't know each other.
Yeah.
And you're not used to spending that much time together. And that can be a real issue. I mean, there's some interesting data on like the sort of the later half of life, and they call it gray divorce. And so people retire and then they're at home together for the first time, like ever. And so if one of or both of the partners have been traveling and working and focused on other things and building a family or whatever life path they chose, then they get to this magical date where all of a sudden they're empty nesters, kids are out of the house, they've retired from work, or maybe they're working less, whether deliberately or not, and then they're sitting across from each other every day. And from a relationship perspective, like that might require a different set of skills than what you've built over the last, however many years, or like you even know the person anymore. So managing a relationship is a skill, right? And something that has to be learned and developed over time.
Maybe that's one thing that COVID has helped with. A lot of people were forced to be home for. This is a trial run for when you're actually, in the retirement phase.
Sure.
You're home for a year with the person. You're like, okay, can we do this? Can we be in this close proximity for, months on end and not kill each other and actually maybe enjoy it?
Yeah.
And find arts and crafts we enjoy doing together or whatever.
Yeah. Learn how to occupy your time or figure out who you want to be next. And COVID gave people opportunity to do a lot of that stuff.
I'd be kind of curious what you think about this. So once upon a time, I was telling a buddy of mine, I was looking at the birth rates over year over year or whatever. And I said, there's kind of a lull around the time frame that I was born. I'm sort of like between the baby boomers and the next, so there's this kind of like a little bit of a lull in the uptick in birth rate. It's going up, but it was going up slightly less.
Like the Zennials or?
I would be like the very tail end of Gen X, basically.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and that's how you know. It's like almost doesn't have a name, you know what I mean? I have to describe it as the tail of Gen X. And so this guy was an up and coming. He was definitely the smartest kid in the room, definitely going to go somewhere. And I said, well, the nice part is you're born at a time where you're going to see the baby boomers are all going to retire about this time frame, 65, 70, around there. And so you're going to be in your 40s when that happens, and you're going to be first in line for executive positions, first in line for board positions, right? Because you're going to have tons and tons of experience. and there's really no one above you. I mean, there's just a handful of people as a comparative ratio, But then COVID happened, and very recently, a buddy of mine, he's like, we saw a situation where basically everyone was going to retire, and then all of a sudden, no one is going to retire. No one. Everyone went from very risky, possibly going to leave the company, to zero risk. They're going to be around forever.
Wow.
And then a year or so now has passed since then, and you think, okay, now they're about to leave. No, because the economic downturn, they're even more willing to stick it out forever,
Sure.
And so if all things had been equal, I think I might have been right, but now we're in this kind of bizarre situation where I'm not sure that I'm not sure there is a retirement anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, do people retire? I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
When's the last time you've been to a retirement party?
Oh, other than for people that are retiring out of the military.
Yeah, other than
I don't
that.
know if I've been to a retirement party as an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I've read that, and I think the statistic is still true, nearly 90% of people retiring from the military turn around and start another job.
Right, exactly.
Or as soon as they can get one, they start working again.
Right. So it's only
So
retirement
even
from
they
this
don't
job.
retire.
Right, yeah.
Well, and I worked in the retirement business for a little while. I helped start a retirement account or retirement business at one point. And I got very interested in the concept, and it means different things to different people. And so I think the whole concept of retirement is changing. In some cases, probably just because it has to. The article, I saw an article very recently that basically said, to your point, that there's a lot of folks that are retired who are thinking about going back to work. And this might be just the economy, it might be the inflation, all these factors that are accumulating. And at the same time, people might just be looking for something to do.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of, you can, if done right, get a lot of fulfillment from work. Work might tie into your purpose. And, there might be things going on in their lives where they say, I've got skills and experience that I want to share, or there might be a financial need to go back into it. So I think the concept of retirement is going to shift. I don't know if I would ever want to retire completely.
Yeah, me neither.
Like I would want to do something.
But I used to think that was a fairly strange or anomalistic thing, but maybe it isn't. Maybe the age of retirement has gone to however long it takes before people just can't work.
Sure.
Which is a much older age than 65.
Now it is. Yeah, definitely.
Now it is.
Yeah. Well, and then the way we work has changed. There's so many different ways to make, this is America. There's probably more than 1 million ways to make $1 million. And so what might look like work to one person might not be someone else's work. So, the guy sitting poolside with the laptop, cranking on a Friday. And so that we can do things now that we haven't been able to do in the past, and technology makes that possible.
Absolutely.
So it's really, democratizing everything to include work.
Yeah. I mean, there's really no reason I couldn't be anywhere in the world and do what I want, except for this. This is the one thing I have to be in front of people, which is kind of funny. It kind of locks me in. But my actual day job, I could be anywhere in the world and no one would even notice.
Sure.
I mean, unless I just said, hey, my time zones have changed for some reason.
Yeah.
But otherwise they would have no idea. Yeah.
Well, and there are now lots of companies that are completely remote. You can make it work. It's different. It's different than when everybody's in the building together. But there's some research and articles emerging on it. Like one of the primary things that changes is how you have to communicate. So communication actually becomes, just different. And your managers and your leaders will spend, down to every employee will spend more time communicating than they've probably ever spent, or would have spent if they were all in an office together.
I mean, I've been working remote on and off for over 20 years. I remember one of my first real jobs. I was just a product manager rather. And I had I think I had 5 offices. I had 3 in downtown San Francisco, 1 in Sunnyvale, and then one at my house. So I'd bounce between these different places and no one knew where I was. I just show up one day and people are like, oh, you're in the office, this office today, as opposed to one of the other offices. Or I'm at home today and I'd just be on the phone and, messaging people online or whatever. And it might as well been a full remote job, but occasionally it made sense because I had an in-person meeting and I really wanted to see their face and make sure I knew what was going on and sit down and draw stuff out, whiteboard it or whatever. This is before whiteboarding apps online were really a thing.
Right.
And so I've been used to this thing for basically almost my entire working career, practically, not almost the entire thing, but not the entire thing. To me, this is not a new situation really, but watching everyone react to it, like I was on a Uber the other day and this guy is like, he came from Las Vegas or something. And he's like, well, the one thing is during COVID, everybody in Las Vegas kind of lives in a little bit of a shoebox. There aren't like these particularly large houses unless you go way outside. He's like, but Austin, it seems like everybody's got a big house. So working from home just seems different. And it didn't really occur to me until he said it. And we happened to be driving by this, rows and rows and rows and rows of little McMansions, mini McMansions, probably could fit 20 people in there working full time and it would be perfectly spacious. You would not run into each other at all. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it is true. There's enough space in these houses in Texas. And I'm sure there's lots of rural America that is similar. Yeah. You and your spouse and your kids could all be doing their homework or, working their day jobs or whatever. And you'd never see each other unless you wanted to. It's
totally possible if you have enough space. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're living in a little apartment or a little condo downtown,
that would be rough.
Yeah, maybe you can't do that, or maybe one of you can if there's two of you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you've got a spacious place, then yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did something where my wife was in the garage or was in a different part of the house, and then we have a loft where we live in the condo, and
put her in the garage,
and I worked in the loft. Well, for what she was doing, at the time,
being funny.
Yeah.
So when I don't know, maybe not the last time I talked, definitely not the last time, a couple times ago that we met in person, you were working at a company, I think it was called Chorus, if the memory serves, that was doing some analysis on, I'm going to try to paraphrase it and you can fix it. It was able to identify places in the company that were not performing well or were about to not perform well using some sort of dashboard that rolls up to the executive team.
Yes.
Did I paraphrase well, or is that?
You got that right. Yeah.
I really always liked that idea. Because to me, when I look around the company, I have no idea who's working, not working. I have no idea if the company is healthy or not healthy. I don't know if we're going to meet performance objectives or not. I don't know if sales are about to meet their numbers. It's just really difficult as a senior person to look across the entire enterprise and have any sense of what's going on. But that transparency, I think, is just one of those things that can transform your company into completely ineffective to wildly effective.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a really, really great concept. So think about it this way. How many departments spend time doing like real forecasting? So, I mean, it's typical to have a sales leader.
Maybe marketing.
Maybe. Yeah. And that's if there's that magical phrase like sales and marketing alignment. And if they're working really well together, which they usually don't, then maybe there's some sort of aligned forecast. I mean, the key word is alignment. So, I mean, really what you want to be able to figure out is like if one department's going to miss, who else is going to miss? And what can we do about it? And you want to find out as soon as possible.
Yes.
Bad news doesn't get any better with age.
Right.
Regardless of the size of the organization. And in fact, in smaller companies, like one little thing could derail everybody really quickly.
Especially in product development where everyone's expecting the big product launch on this day or whatever. And marketing's all ramped up and sales has been hyping it up to
everything's backed up to that.
Yeah. And there's this one guy, he's like, it ain't going to work. Sorry, guys.
Right. And then you got somebody in testing. Yeah. That's like, hey, if I don't get the code by X date, we're going to miss the ship date.
Yep.
And if there's no way to surface that, all the stuff that you just described is going to not occur on the time in which you had anticipated it.
Yeah.
So you can buy software that can help you with this. Like you can even go to Chorus, but the concept really is what I think is the most fascinating.
Yeah, me too.
you basically start out with your mission, your vision, your values, and then your long-term goals and short-term goals. And long-term goals maybe a year or a little bit longer, and short-term goals quarter, or maybe there's some other time frame. Mm-hmm. I think they're good sales
or maybe
departments.
A sprint if you're
could
a dev
be a
team.
sprint if you're a dev team. Could be a month if you're in like a consumer kind of sales motion, or you're selling a consumer product. So but you want to set those goals on a time frame that's like relevant for the business and for the department. And then just very simply, after these goals have been set, you have the conversation about if there's something that requires two departments, now you've got a joint goal. And there's other terms for goals today. You might hear them called OKRs, or objectives and key results.
Or KPIs. Or whatever.
Yeah, and then your objective is going to have some key result tied to it. Other people might call that a key performance indicator, or a KPI. Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, the KPI term originally hailed from the scorecard. So other large organizations will call this a scorecard. Mm-hmm. And they'll know business unit by business unit, what are we measuring? And it can often will go way beyond just P&L, right? And so every department will have their goals. And if they're aligned properly, then if you're in one department and there's another department, you guys are working on something similar, again, you've now got a joint goal. And then at the same time, where there are dependencies. So you just talked about like missing a ship date on code, or pushing a new release out, or getting new product into the marketplace.
Or like a vendor that you have a partnership with and everyone's all super excited about it. And it's like, oh, actually there's all these gotchas in the contract. It's not happening.
Gotchas in the contract, or
that nuclear bomb radius is enormous.
Yeah. Or you go way down the process with them to find out that like they don't have their cyber up to date, or they have some issue. And if you would have discovered that sooner, that could have saved you a bunch of time. And now you maybe got to switch vendors. And so anything where you can teach yourself and teach the team or the people to start thinking about the future.
Another big example of this that happens quite often is M&A.
Yeah.
Like everyone's expecting that this company is going to get acquired. Everything's looking good. And right at the very last minute, something pops up and you're like, oof, we cannot buy this company. It is too dangerous because of X, Y, and Z. We found out corporate malfeasance. We found something weird about their books. Like, nope, we're not doing this. Meanwhile, everybody internally, all the biz dev teams, all the marketing teams are all spun up about this new, major thing is the press releases are basically already written. And that's a big red dot on that screen. Like,
sure.
The blast radius is enormous and affects all these teams. And
yeah. Well, so the big red dot, so to explain that, like, every week you should go out and forecast or predict how you're going to do with your goals. Red, yellow, green for the end of the time period. And then red means there's no way we're going to hit this. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Yellow means, we don't know. There's an issue. Here's the issue. We're working on it. And then green means, we're good to go. And we're very likely going to hit the goal at the end of the time period.
Right. And
so then you can imagine what impact this has when your whole leadership team and then eventually the whole company is you doing something similar. Mm-hmm. So conceptually, I love the idea. I always have. We do it in my business with a spreadsheet. And so you can use very, caveman tech,
sure.
Or you can get really, really sophisticated if you have a much larger organization. So, and it's a really, really interesting process. But to your point about the M&A stuff.
Okay.
Those fall apart for lots and lots of reasons. And in many cases, it's once you start working on one, everybody takes their eye off the ball on the other day-to-day stuff. And so if it falls apart at the last minute, and I've seen this happen before, now you're scrambling and you're trying to figure out what to do. And that can be extremely stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as an executive team, let's say you have, a couple hundred people working underneath you or whatever, SMB or something. There's no way you're going around and calling all 200 people once a week to see if they're have any blockers or have anything going on. But if I'm looking at dashboard and it's all green except for like this little spot of red down here, that is so easy to identify. Like, hey, what's going on with this team? Like, we're missing a lot of numbers here. they keep telling us things are going to happen and they don't happen. Do they not have support? Do they not have enough money? Do they not have enough people? Like, what is causing all these delays? It's so much easier to focus your energy back down to the things that actually are problematic.
Yes.
I really don't know a better way to do it. I can't think of a better way to know at a glance every single person's status across the entire company without something like this.
Yeah, I don't have a better response. I don't have a better answer for that either.
Yeah.
It's just, if you think about it, most organizations don't have the maturity to do that, or they're all using different systems. And then today, that in a large organization, there's probably reams of people, lots and lots of jobs tied up in building spreadsheets and getting data into a data warehouse and into a Tableau or into some like reporting dashboard. So they're looking at what's going on, or in many cases, what's already happened. And it takes a pretty sophisticated organization to really get into predictive analytics. Although today there's a lot of systems for that, and it's much more common today. The one really unique thing Chorus did was it brought the human element into it, which was, okay, now what do you think?
Yeah.
Here's all the dashboarding. Here's all you can have all the predictive analytics in the world, and then you overlay like the human element and the human perspective on it based on everything else that that's not in a system.
Yeah, the only way I could see this being a true detriment is someone at the very bottom of the totem pole might be awfully reluctant to say things are going bad because their manager's going to look bad, and that's going to reflect badly on them, especially if you have a kind of a toxic environment internally.
Sure.
But that's exactly the situation in which if I saw something going red, I'd immediately be looking at their manager. And it's like, why didn't this manager foresee you needing these things? Why didn't your manager help you before this became a problem? And right there, I mean, I'm not saying put him on a PIP that second or something, but I'd be much more inclined to be focusing some energy on that individual. And then how did that director above them that happen, where that person, that manager or whatever was letting this occur, so it's a clear ownership, chain of this thing that's happening.
Well, I would actually encourage you to think a little differently about it.
Sure. Go ahead. No.
You want people to feel comfortable and safe to say this is red, because that can happen really, really quickly. And so let's say everybody's reporting on a certain day, and the manager just might not have had a chance to do anything about it yet, or it might not even know yet. And so you have to have a protocol. Like, do you want to tell the manager, hey, this is red, or this goal isn't, we're not going to accomplish this before they put it in the system and then have a chance to do something about it? Or would you rather it go into the system? And so that there's visibility, and then maybe some other department who's tied to that or who is depending on that can also see it or can also hear about it.
Right.
And so having a system to back you up, I mean, scalability, sustainability is really about systems and processes. And so having a system for that can actually be really, really helpful. And now I think, to your point, what that does is it gives you the opportunity to drill in where the issue is. And maybe it's something that the manager can't solve either, or the director.
It could be budgeting issues.
Budget, or some change in the marketplace, or some change that's outside of your control. A key team member leaves.
I think the budgeting one is an interesting one, though, because this is another way for the executive team to be looking at their entire organization and say, we keep going red here. This keeps happening. And then you talk to the manager and it's like, well, yeah, that's because we have two guys, like 3 of them left the company.
Sure.
We used to have 5. Now we've got 2, we're trying to do a lot with a little. And you're like,
and
wow,
those 2 are crazy overworked.
Yeah. And they're about to leave because they don't have support. And so we're about
looking.
I know that one's looking for sure. And I'm pretty sure I heard that guy talking to water cooler about leaving or whatever. Time to start hiring right now. And you can see it in advance, and maybe way in advance. I'm like, okay, started getting a lot of yellows. Now it started going a lot more red. Like, that team has a history of having performance problems. Is it budget? And that's a really great way to define, like, we're not just making this up over here.
Sure.
Our budget is far too small for what you're asking us to do.
Or they just might have had goals that were stretch goals.
Yeah.
And the key thing with stretch goals is, like, what are you going to do if people don't hit them? And so you want essentially a culture that can basically catch them, because that can become a problem over time.
Absolutely. So I saw this article the other day, and I immediately thought we'd have to talk about this.
Sure.
It was super, super interesting. So I pulled out a couple of quotes because I just thought this thing was fantastic, super interesting. So this guy, and I'm going to probably butcher his name, and I apologize to him ahead of time because this is not a slight on him of me not being able to pronounce his name. I think it's Praveen Sheshadri.
Okay.
Apparently he used to run a company. It was acquired by Google, and then he just recently left Google. So he was in a lockup for 3 years, and then he bailed. So he wrote this basically on the way out the door. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, just these couple clips. So the first quote, Google has 175,000 plus capable and well-compensated employees who get very little done quarter over quarter, year over year. Like mice, they are trapped in a maze of approvals, launch processes, legal reviews, performance reviews, executive reviews, documents, meetings, bug reports, triage, OKRs, H1 plans, followed by H2 plans, all-hands summits, inevitable reorgs. The mice are regularly fed their cheese, in quotes, promotions, bonuses, fancy food, fancier perks, and despite many wanting to experience personal satisfaction and impact from their work, the system trains them to quell these inappropriate desires and learn what is actually means to be googly. Just don't rock the boat. I mean, talk about stabbing you in the heart. Wow.
Yeah. It's a heck of a critique.
And there's more. I got to take this in pieces. What is your take on that? Like,
I would ask Socratically.
Sure.
What company of that size really doesn't sound like that? So those things creep in over time. I think that's really, really difficult to keep them out. And that's, to me, that sounds like somebody who is coming from a startup where he was probably running the show too.
Oh, yeah, I think he was the CEO.
Yeah, and then drops into this enormous organization, which he didn't start a startup on accident, or he didn't build his own business on accident. Like he did that on purpose. And then he ended up inside of one of the largest organizations in the world and one of the most profitable, and saw really the difference between the two. And that's a pretty big leap.
It is.
And it's a pretty big leap. So yeah, it's a pretty scathing critique. You could ask, is that just the normal course of business, or when you have
for all companies that size?
All companies of that size, or when you have so many people that are so smart and so capable, what's likely to happen? Because they're all like super competitive and probably mostly type A, all trying to do the best they can, and bumping into each other. And so there's that to me sounds like almost what you would expect from a founder who sold a company into a very large organization, sat there for several years, and probably went from being able to make decisions on the fly to now having to deal with all that bureaucracy. Because that's what that is. That's a lot of bureaucracy.
That sure is.
Yeah.
Okay. Along the same quote, if this were an algorithm, we'd call it the most cautious wins. And so in this case, I kind of agree with Google's stance on this, if that was indeed an intentional policy.
Sure.
Let's say it's not. Because there's so much to lose if you screw it up.
Sure.
You're talking about billions of dollars a year in potential profit that could go out the window if you change a piece of JavaScript to do something slightly different on the homepage.
Sure.
Not minor delta there, having those peer reviews and really making sure everything's done correctly. It has a point. There's a real upside to doing it that way. But at the same time, it also seems like that's really hindering a certain type of person. And maybe that type of person doesn't belong inside Google, period.
Sure. Or maybe not at this point. I mean, at one point,
Sure.
I haven't looked recently, but they were $1 trillion valuation, $1 trillion corporation. And so I don't have the first clue about how to run something that large. Do you? I mean, that's a very, very large.
Got some ideas.
Yeah, sure, we've got ideas, but like that's a very large. That's a very large organization. It was like being the president of the United States. I mean, how does anybody actually do that job, right? And do that job really well. I think that's it's a difficult situation, but they have a different view on risk at that size. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding.
Yeah,
it's a different view on risk, and so there's certain, probably umpteen levels of control that have to be in place. And for a long time, they were buoyed by just having it may be the most elegant and the most beautiful business model ever in the ads machine. Mm-hmm. And so now that, you hear that, traffic acquisition costs are up, or they're competing in cloud with Amazon and Microsoft. These are not two competitors that are going to lay down.
Right.
And so you've got to think, at that level, how do you keep things like pushing towards taking the right risks, while at the same time managing like the rest of the organization to not take too much risk, or if something doesn't go right, that they're still going to be able to perform and hit all those expectations. Mm-hmm. If you think about the list of stakeholders, it's nearly everyone alive that has access to the internet is using Google, or any of these other really, really large companies, Microsoft.
I mean, they all are, whether they know it or not.
Sure, yeah. So. And then investors, and of course, markets put a lot of pressure on boards and CEOs, and it's 175,000 employees, and then how many tens of millions of customers across all of the business units. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot of people.
So, but this is, I think, the detriment in all of this. There's always, quote, there's always going to be someone uncomfortable enough to want to do nothing. And that's that pocket veto. That's that one person who's going to throw up some red flag. It doesn't matter how tiny that red flag is, like, that might sound bad if we do blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it takes virtually no effort to stop the machine. That is very dangerous. That's the killer for me right there. And so how do you do that? How do you get around people who are just, their whole point in life is to add bureaucracy to stop doing work?
Yeah. If we had the answer to that, if I had the answer to that, I'd be running the biggest consulting firm in the world. Yeah, I think that's hard. There's probably a few things that you can consider, and trying to balance out who's on the team and what their personalities are and what their personality styles are. And you can do personality tests. And if everyone on the team is like, there's the big five, for example, might be a great way to eat something super stone cold simple to start with. And if everybody looks exactly the same or has exactly the same personality style, then they're all going to make decisions probably the same way. And so you might want to, even big companies need help with this stuff. You might want to make sure that team has got some diverse thinking or got some diverse personality styles.
But I'm not sure if diversity in this particular case is actually going to solve that problem. Because if you have
diversity in thought.
No, I know. I understand what you mean. But if you have truly diverse thought, you're always going to have the one person who's ultra lazy and say, we probably shouldn't do it because of some random reason I just came up with. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it seems like you need a specific kind of person who owns the gate for that thing, whatever you're developing or trying to push out the door. And that person has to have some risk tolerance, some sense of there's got to be an upside to doing what we're doing. So,
or potentially having a person that's accountable for the delivery, that can make a decision to push, or make a decision over the rest of the team or the committee. And sometimes doing too many things by committee just slows things down, and nothing gets done.
Yeah. Okay, next quote.
Sure.
There are documents that explicitly and proudly deride heroism and assert that not only should product teams not encourage heroes, they should actively dissuade them. And then next quote, in this system, nothing is worth fighting for.
Wow.
Ouch.
Yeah.
I think you're right, though. I think a lot of big companies end up looking like this. This isn't unique to them. I mean, they might be especially bad in the heroism comment because, frankly, heroes often save the day. That is literally why they're called heroes.
Yeah.
Now, yes, it would be better if we had a process in place to stop this thing from needing to be heroically saved. But also, some of the coolest tech is something that was out of someone's garage and they just, powered through it one night and they created something awesome. And now we have whatever, some awesome new app.
Sure.
Facebook, for instance.
Right.
It's more or less a project by a couple of heroes in the basement, or garage or whatever.
A dorm room.
And
then a garage.
Then a garage. Amazon was a garage.
Garage, yeah.
So that was pretty scathing. So his one sort of comment on how you might try to fix this that I thought was interesting was, you should switch instead of this model into a value creation model to be, quote, who did I create value for today?
Yeah.
And so stopping things from happening does not create value. It just stops things. You didn't erase value, which is nice, but you didn't create any value by that action. And so how can you switch everything, all this entire monolithic, massive mega corporation into a value creation engine for mankind, for, individual, people who are buying ads or whatever.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of compelling. It made me think.
That's extremely compelling. Yeah. That goes back to, the mission and values, and probably starting with values and then working back to what am I doing on a day-to-day basis, and realigning what I'm doing or what a team is doing or what they're focused on to adding value somehow.
This is what it kind of comes back full circle to chorus, right? So one of the OKRs that could be on the thing for everybody at the bottom is just like, one of the questions is, how are you creating value this week for whoever your customer is, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, whatever we're talking about. Like, how are you doing that? Give me one example of one of those things you're doing this week. And so just getting people thinking every single week, maybe I should build that thing for them. Like, this would actually really help them if I could produce this one extra whatever. Yeah. Or maybe I'm not going to be able to do it in a week, but I'll be able to work on it this week and make it a little progress every week.
Right.
Because if you're not doing that, what are you doing?
Right. Well, and think about all the different ways to add value. Yeah. So you can make something better, faster, cheaper, improve an experience, increase a conversion rate. Like, these are all
speed things up slightly.
Yeah, faster, absolutely, yeah, and get back to the basics really in every role. And even if you're like in a shared service and your customer is another internal department, are they better, faster, lighter, whatever the right answer is for that team, and measuring, or at least being able to discuss what adds value, what's valuable to them. And it's different. It's different for each team, but having a good understanding of what that other team does, which you can develop by having like goals together or joint goals, that can actually move the needle.
I feel like I've always played around. I've been dancing around this thought for a long time. I just never came up with it myself. So good on this guy, Praveen. But I always used to say, like back in the eBay days, I'm like, is this good for the business? Whatever we're doing. I don't care what decision's being made, just is it positive for the business? And so we could be in a drop down, drag out fight about some mini feature or whatever. I'm like, I don't care. Am I right or wrong? It doesn't actually matter. What matters is this good for the business or not? And then through that one lens, it would made everything much more clearer. And people would get less angry. They're like, okay, all right, I see why you're saying that is better for the company. It may suck for me. I'm gonna have to do a bunch of work, but it is much better for the company if we do X. Yeah. Okay, well, then that's the right answer.
Well, and then could you point to something that was unifying for the whole company, and that's like there was something on the wall that you could point to that said, here's the goal, or this is where we're going?
I mean, I think it depended on the case, right? Yeah. I don't think it was uniform, but you can kind of tell, like, hey, I'm going to need you to do like all this annoying busy work. Like, that sucks. This is annoying busy work. Yes. Sure. You only have to do it once. And once we're done with it, and I know it sucks, then we'll have this new feature, and this feature is amazing. And, and we know these customers want it, and we know it can help conversions over here. It's like, yes, it sucks for you. I'm not disputing that.
Sure.
I don't care though. What's good for the business? That's the thing we all have to care about.
Yeah.
And same thing with me. I would do horrible, awful, busy work once, but then I knew there was some upside for the company. And
That's right.
So I ate my own dog food in that regard.
Yeah.
But I never really thought about it as value creation. That eluded me, and I like that a lot.
Yeah. He brought up a really interesting concept with that.
Yeah. So we're going to switch topics a little bit. So you were involved in a company at one point that got compromised, which I thought was kind of an interesting, it was interesting for a number of reasons, but maybe it's better if you just tell the story. So how did you find out you were compromised? Like, what was that process?
Yeah, one of the team members came in and said, "Hey, something has happened, and we've been compromised." And the CTO actually. And so immediately, like, your heart sinks and you're like, oh, what do I do? And you had never gone through that before, not personally. Mm-hmm. So you immediately start thinking the worst. But we took action as quickly as we could. I think you were one of the phone calls that I made. Mm-hmm. And so that was figuring out what to do next and what to do first. Mm-hmm. Difficult. It's a difficult thing to go through.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember for sure. Did you actually use an insurance policy?
We did. Okay. Yeah, we had insurance.
What was that process like?
So you call the insurance company, you say, hey, look, something's happened. I need to basically open a claim. Mm-hmm. And depending on the policy, like, this happens so frequently. My key takeaway was this happens so frequently. The insurance companies have this down to a science. You open the claim just like you would an auto collision. And the insurance companies have a plethora of service providers lined up, ready to go. And so if you've got to send out mailers, they've got a vendor for that. If you've got to send filing reports or compliance reports to state agencies or federal agencies or anyone involved, they've got a vendor for that. Wow. Or a law firm ready to go. So they literally had everything that you needed essentially at the ready. And you just work through that. You pick the vendor, you work through the process, and then you do what you got to do to do the right thing, take care of your customers, secure your systems, get everything back to normal.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so was the fee that they give you, or the money that they pay you back, does that primarily cover those vendors, or does it also cover, other types of cleanup costs? Like, did you find that you ended up spending more money on cleanup versus these vendors, or vice versa? Like, what was your spend like? What was that whole thing?
Yeah, I don't recall all of the details, but like, they have negotiated rates, just like insurance companies do. They have negotiated rates to provide these services.
So you knew ahead of time.
So you find out very quickly. Yeah.
I see.
And then ours wasn't as substantial as like some of these big ones that you see on TV, like Equifax or something like that. So I imagine those, like, you just discover, it seems like they just discover more and more and more over time. And so I would imagine for those larger organizations, the costs just keep spiraling, even with insurance policies, because there's all kinds of other things that have to happen internally. You've got coordination costs, time, lost effort, as much as you try to, like, as much as I imagine, as much as they would try to, like, keep everybody focused on everything else that the business has to do, there's still going to be some spillover, plus brand impact. If you're publicly traded, maybe your stock takes a hit. Who knows? Mm-hmm.
I have found, generally speaking, for those traders out there, that you'll see about a 10% or less decline in stock for about 10 days, and then it'll recover. So yes, it does. It always hits a little bit, and then it always recovers.
And that sounds like the markets have adjusted, and they basically know how to process that new information, which gets reflected in the security price right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was surprised it was so short-lived. I think the reason I started looking at this was the TJX compromise. They were publicly traded, so it was a little bit easier. And I remember talking to people on the ground who actually shop at TJX. I do not. I know nothing about that store whatsoever. And everyone's like, yeah, I'm never going to use my credit card there again. I'm like, that's a good thing for TJX. They didn't say they were going to shop there. They said they were going to use their credit card. And that just means they've just made a whole bunch more money. They don't have to pay those fees for the credit card processing.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, they are going to make a ton of money actually on this.
What other way are they going to pay? Everybody either pays with a credit card or a debit card
or cash. These are kind of, I would say, not poor people, but people who are struggling, I would say.
So then they'll pay with cash.
They'll pay with cash. And that's good for TJX.
Sure.
It's great. So they still have their low cost, apparel or whatever for these, struggling families or whatever. And they are now making 12% more, which is fantastic. And then I started researching it more, and I realized there's other things, like they have a thing that they send out about your credit monitoring or whatever. It's like 1 free year of credit monitoring, but that's actually a referral program. And so a lot of people will just say, I'm just going to keep it rolling. I'm just going to keep getting this credit reporting going. And so if that happens, you're actually paying now, and now TJX gets a cut of that. So they make money on it. And then I was talking to some Black Hat SEOs about this, and I'm like, this seems like what you'd actually want to do is you'd want to have like a 1 page where you describe exactly what happened. And there's a very specific process for doing that. But you have 1 page.
Like an incident report?
Yeah. But also a mea culpa, and here's what to do about it. And here's why it's never going to happen again. There's some very specific things you need to have in there. And then you point everyone in the world at this thing. So all these blogs are commenting about it. Everybody's commenting on it. And then you leave it there for 6 months or whatever. And then you redirect it to your homepage. And so now you have all these backlinks pointing to your homepage with a tiny bit of link equity missing or whatever. And I just started going through all these little things you could do to actually turn it from a loss to a major win.
Sure.
And now I'm just not convinced that getting breached is a bad thing at all. Like there's no such thing as bad publicity. You know what I mean?
Well, that's true. I mean, status is status, publicity is publicity these days.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of examples of people who capitalize on, or who just, for whatever reason, society builds up because of, or we almost don't even care anymore.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's so prevalent now that everyone's kind of shrugs, like, oh, another one got compromised,
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, well.
It seems like it's now par for the course, and it's not a matter of if it happens, it's just when it happens, and then how prepared are you for it. And that's no excuse not to be as disciplined and as diligent as possible, and to do your certifications and your audits and your penetration testing, and use all the latest and the greatest technology, at least that you can afford. But yes, that's it happens with alarming frequency. I mean, you tell me and you tell us, this is just the way of the world now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it get worse?
Oh, it's going to get worse, but for interesting reasons. But one thing occurred to me when the first thing that happens is the CEO freaks out.
Sure.
Absolutely loses his mind because he thinks he's going to get fired and thinks the company's going to explode. He just doesn't understand. They just don't understand the business mechanics of what's happening. So they really, really, really don't want anyone to know about it. But of course they have to do it through the California disclosure laws, for instance, and whatever, GDPR. And so it occurred to me, one thing that they could do, you could build a service that it's like the most spammy, like unbelievably messy email gateway. The one that is sending out Viagra spam 24/7, like it's from a botnet. It's definitely going to get blocked everywhere. And then send your disclosures through that. And so they end up in everyone's spam box instead of their inbox. And so yes, you have done the disclosure.
Oh, wow.
But no one knows about it except for the handful of people who are super paranoid and look through their spam. And even they, whatever, who cares? They're probably just going to write an article about it and give you a backlink.
Right.
So
that doesn't sound like the most ethical way to handle it.
I just said nothing about ethics, but this is why I'm like, I went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out the way to best monetize the downside of getting hacked. And I think you can make it entirely upside, like very little downside at all.
Yeah. So with SEO.
Yeah. Yeah. Search engine optimization. Exactly. So, were there any sort of cultural shifts after you guys got compromised? Anything internally that changed?
Yeah, some processes had to change. Yeah. And so it's an opportunity, if you look at it that way, to double down on security best practices, and make sure that everybody's doing the right thing, and that you have the right tools, and that you have the right process, and that you're working with somebody like you, or that you have. So even at a small company, it's important to have somebody at the ready or somebody on speed dial that you can get a hold of. And so we had gone through different like SOC certification, and that's a certification program that tests all your policies and procedures and in your systems. And that was really, really helpful from then on.
Going back,
we stayed on the case.
Yeah.
So we reported it to the FBI, and eventually they found the guys.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
I didn't know
another
that.
country. They were in Indonesia. And the Indonesian National Police came here and took testimony from us.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're in jail, the whole thing?
That's where the story drops off.
Okay.
They didn't tell us what happened after that, but
I'd be curious.
I sat there with the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas and an FBI agent and the Indonesian National Police, and explained what happened, what was the impact, and in this case, or in this particular case, the offenders had done quite a bit of this, and so we had just gotten caught up in it.
Interesting. You were just one of the many.
One of many, yeah.
That's really fascinating. So going back for a second, you were talking about the ethics involved in this. A lot of what I do is thought experiments.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time not thinking about the positive or negative ethics of anything, just what's possible. Now you can draw circles around the ethics later, but you have to know what's possible first. Like I could build some crazy robot that destroys the earth. You can? Okay. Is that ethical? Probably not.
Yes.
Probably not. It's okay. So we can draw a circle, not ethical.
I'm sure someone's working on it.
But still possible. When they go, now we agree it's possible and not ethical. So who would do it? Okay. Here's the list of unethical people who might actually try to accomplish that task. And so I think it's important. Sometimes I sound like a bad guy when I'm talking like that, but what's really happening is I'm just letting my brain relax and say, what could have happened? Like, what is the most extreme version of this conversation? Where would you take it with the logical extremes? Because from there you can get back to, okay, what's most likely, and then back to, okay, what's ethical, and so for those listening at home. Okay, so you are now a CEO.
Yes.
So please tell us about your company.
Yeah, the company's called I Am GIS. It's a geographic or geospatial information system application. We help small and mid-sized municipalities with asset management. So think about it. They have tax dollars and they have funds from various sources where they're providing services to constituents into the community, whether that's water, power, utilities, et cetera. And they have equipment for that. So water lines, water valves, manholes, absolutely everything that's in their inventory. They often have both state, local, and maybe federal requirements, or even from the EPA, to do asset management, so they can better provide services and stretch the tax dollar, make sure that all of those assets are used appropriately, used best, to do things like preventative maintenance checks and services, and just to make sure that all those assets are working well. At the end of the day, they're
and
providing
asset in this case would be like a manhole cover. Is that what you're talking about?
Like a manhole cover or a water line or the water
is
treatment
a road
facility.
A single asset?
A road is an asset.
Interesting.
Stop sign is an asset. Their fleet and vehicles are assets. Yes. Everything that they're using to provide you with services. If it's the utility company, they've got all kinds of stuff.
So this is not just municipalities. It's also potentially a utility, as you said, or
a utility. Yeah. Now, and a lot of utilities are provided by municipalities. So if you go into small towns, there might just be the municipal office with the director of public works, and they're providing everything. And so if you think about it, they have assets that they need to manage as well. And there's software and there's solutions in the marketplace for this, but a lot of them are very big and very expensive. And so small and mid-sized municipalities have a different budget profile. And so it's it's an opportunity for us to provide them with a value-added service and a value-added application that allows them to accomplish their objectives. It allows them to better manage their assets and provide services to their communities.
So do you have the same kind of overlays that, let's say, an Esri would have? Or?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
They're now like the largest company in the space.
They are?
They are, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. I used to work with Esri many, many, many moons ago in the context of trying to provide crime overlays on top of Realtor.com data. So you could basically say, well, there's a certain amount of crime in this area. Probably don't want to put your kid in school there. Maybe this other school is a better one, better choice or whatever. And the National Association of Realtors hated this idea. They hated it because they thought well, no one's ever going to be able to sell houses in this area, which is just shows you what they think about the general public. But
Sure.
I thought that just even that, and there's a lot of other types of overlays, was so fascinating and just to play with.
Yeah. So for very advanced users and very advanced use cases, we'd call that data fusion, where you're mashing up data from a couple of different places to then go and do something predictive or something super advanced. And the space that we play in is essentially the early phase of the digital transformation. So a lot of small town America still runs off of paper or very early software systems. And so that's an opportunity for us to bring in a more robust modern application and help them in their digital journey.
I thought that there probably wouldn't be that many use cases for GIS when I was first thinking about this, but then I went to this one website and it said, I think the title of it was 1,000 different things you can do with GIS data or something, something like that.
Yeah.
And I just scrolled and it just kept scrolling and I'm like, they're serious. It literally is 1,000 things long.
Sure.
And agriculture is one massive section. And then there's, geospatial type of things, another massive section, weather in Antarctica, massive section. And so what are sort of some exciting use cases that you've come up with that you think would be kind of compelling to talk about?
Well, sure. So the primary one is being able to take a city or a town from paper maps into a completely digital experience where they have all of their assets for the various departments on a map. And they're using that for work orders and for administration. I like to describe this as a journey. So phase one, they're really going digital or moving from an old system into a modern application, getting all the assets into the system, and then being able to actually manage them, use the database, produce their reports, handle compliance and reporting. And then in phase two, it really starts to integrate into their workflow. And so we have work orders, and now we can upload different documents, and really it starts to streamline the entire experience and the entire use for them. And so that's really where we start to see a major impact.
I've always been curious about roads in particular, about why cities and states are not putting more strict contracts in place with their road vendors and saying, well, we're seeing degradation here, and here, these road types or whatever. You need to, guarantee this for 13 years and any degradation in 13 or whatever the number is, any degradation over that time period, it's on your dime. So you're going to have to, have some massive escrow in place to, handle this amount of, you not complying or you going out of business, chapter 11 and 11ing yourself right at the very end of the contract or something. I mean, there's a way to have roads that don't have holes in them.
Sure.
And we just don't seem to be doing any of those things.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. And then it's probably a budget issue.
I've lived in a number of cities now. It's everywhere.
It's
maybe not in Beverly Hills or something, but everywhere else.
Sure. It's more than likely a budget issue. And then thinking probably back to the conversation we were having earlier, how you do planning and how do you do city planning, and then how do we do contracting and what's the source of funds and where is it all coming from, and getting something on paper to commit to, like a decade or more is that's a tall order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it seems like the only way we're going to have roads that
better roads.
I mean. Yeah. To me, this seems extremely simple, but maybe I'm just not thinking through the complexity within maybe the budgeting cycle is like, well, we can't handle anything more than 4 years out because that's where our budgeting cycle ends. And so we don't care if the roads have holes in them in 4 years.
Sure.
Or I'm out of the office in 4 years anyway. So what does it matter?
And unless they're private, you're dealing with election cycles and politicians and the whole 9 yards and everything that comes with that. I remember seeing an interview with, I think it was the governor of Pennsylvania, and he said, we're going to fix, so many thousand roads and bridges this year. And the good news is that next year we're going to fix 5,000, or we have 7,000 to fix. And so like the problem is like much, much larger than most people can really grasp or realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had things like these massive innovations like Google Maps. TerraVision, I think, was possibly the original. We're still figuring out whether they were the original ones or not. I think that court case will end up soon. We'll figure out who it is. We had things like Street View. I think that was a pretty massive innovation in GIS, overlay data. Where do you think things are going from here? Like, what is the next big innovation beyond here, do you think?
Well, I think we'll start to see more of the artificial intelligence find its way into different GIS applications and anything that's even close to it. And then just the proliferation really of mapping and geo capabilities. So almost every app now has or could find a way to use a map for something. And it's just going to become commonplace in virtually every application that you're using. There'll be some sort of mapping capability. Think we got GPS everywhere, and any app can access it if you give it access. And so there's going to be a lot of new ways of using a map and using geodata to go about your daily life. And then from a business perspective, it enables all kinds of new data capabilities and potentially data insights about your business, about customers that really weren't there before. So with new capabilities comes new opportunities. Remember before we had GPS or when it was just a military technology, look at where we are now.
Right.
And so the world has changed dramatically. We're never going back. Right. And our lives are all,
let's hope.
And our lives are all, Star Wars. Our lives are all way better for it. So I think the proliferation of mapping and geo data everywhere is probably is where we're headed for sure. And then the data fusion will continue to advance, and you being able to do more advanced analytics and forecasting, modeling, things of that nature, and then fueled by now artificial intelligence. Every day it seems like there's another new AI tool popping up that's this new wave of AI is actually very, very different than the stuff that we saw floating around Austin 5 to 7 years ago even.
Yeah, I thought Waze was another interesting one.
Waze.
Data fusion. And the way I understood partly that came to be was they had some agreement with a company called Land Sonar. I believe this is how this happened, so please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But effectively what they did is everybody's cell phone as they were traveling down the highway was beaconing to different base stations. And if they notice everybody's going slow on the highway, there's probably a traffic jam. And then it turned into this massive sort of app that we all sort of know and love. And now it's everywhere. Now you have it in basically any mapping app that has any direction capabilities. But I think the future of that is even more interesting. Like being able to really, really accurately predict. It's one of those things like when people say define something that's like magic, or define something that would be like next to impossible to get to the point where you could build it if society had to restart. Like they have all these versions of the same question. To my mind, they're all really the same question. And really the ability to go from one place in the country to another place in the country down to the minute and the map being correct. I mean, the amount of things that had to go right for that system to work that way that you expect it to work is enormous.
Yeah.
It's truly enormous. And so that's really the power of GIS, or one of the many things you can do with GIS, I would say. And without it, I mean, you're old enough to remember paper maps. You were in the military, right?
We used to print them.
Yes.
MapQuest, and then put them in the car. And then how often did you stop at a gas station and ask for directions.
Yeah, you had to ask for directions. And
now I just send them to the phone.
Yeah, exactly. And so the difference between then and now is so amazingly large. I think we kind of forget how useful that technology has been. And kids these days simply don't even have the skill to know what a map, how to even read a map, like which way's north. Yeah. How do I know which way's north? And they're helpless. And yet, it's one of those critical things we had to have in the car. Otherwise, when you were lost, what were you going to do? No payphone in sight, no cell phones.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, it's beyond just maps and GIS, like the cloud and digital telephony and over-the-air data, the cell networks and the mobile networks and the invention of the iPhone and the smartphones and Android
satellites
versus Google, satellites and GPS, which was almost all government funded. So even the internet, like, stems from DARPA. So a lot of this is really the result of...
And roads with relatively few holes in them.
Yeah. This is the result of, in a lot of ways, to use an old Google phrase, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Yeah. That was a common phrase used there. And these were technologies that the government had put money into for a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm. So I got to think that there's a pretty strong use case for AR in particular, and also possibly VR to some extent. And some of the examples I've seen out of oil and gas, although this is wildly under NDA, so I've never actually seen it myself. But the way I understand it is, you can go into a room, put on these goggles, and now you're underneath the crust of the earth, and you can see the fractures, and you can turn them around in three-dimensional space and see the best possible options for doing things, and gloves and moving it and expanding it and whatever. Okay, here's a fissure here, and here's the best possible path to get down here, which is really a three-dimensional space. It's not like most people think of when they look at the crust, it's kind of like a side view, but really it's a three-dimensional object. So you kind of have to understand where all the, like, this is obviously shale here. This is like some other like minerals here. It's not going to work very well if we mine here. Like, that's the kind of thing that's a level of GIS that I think most people just don't really fully grok, like true three-dimensional views.
Yeah, that's I'm unaware of that. That's amazing that they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different technologies for like looking down into the ground and seeing seeing what's beneath the surface. Mm-hmm. And so these technologies are technologies until there's an application that's useful. And oil and gas, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And then you can figure out where to more effectively drill or not drill or use some other extraction technology or technique. That's pretty amazing.
A similar kind of use case was a military one that I heard. It was sort of like understanding the different types of salinity in the ocean and underwater rivers, and understanding where kelp beds are, or mass migrations of fish, or other boats on the surface. And there's like this really a three-dimensional, constantly evolving set of objects. So this GIS is not a fixed thing in time. It's not like, okay, we have a snapshot of the ocean, we're good. It's constantly evolving. There's underwater earthquakes and whatever. And so things are constantly shifting. The currents are moving things along. And, we had Fukushima, for instance. So now there's like radioactive, like things, isotopes going through the water, and here's where they are. Here's their, we have these massive gyres in the middle of the ocean. Like, all these things are useful to know if you're underwater and trying to be very stealthy.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, if you have a radiation leak, you might want to do it near a radiation source that you could get away with it, or whatever. Yep. Or whatever.
Well, this is why you could say GIS is all around you.
Yeah.
And it's in every corner it could be in every corner of the earth. Mm-hmm. So in 70% of the world is covered in water. Mm-hmm. So that opens up some pretty interesting research questions, and then from a military perspective, that data would be incredibly important if you're in a submarine, or the Navy, and you're patrolling the seas, and you're doing that to protect shipping lines. And so now you can see how all this stuff actually starts to really come together. Mm-hmm. What did it for me was we're a mission driven an emission-based company, and our mission's to help small and mid-sized municipalities better manage their assets. And they provide water and electricity and other like extremely important services to their communities. So that's what makes this stuff so important, is it's life.
Right.
It's helping to provide life.
I remember one more use case that's probably worth talking about. I was at NASA Goddard Flight Center, and they were actually, I think Chris was in there with me as well. But they were describing overhead views, long-term snapshots. These are like decades of snapshots of Iran, and so overflights, and they were showing how Iran had grown over these many, probably at least 2 decades. But it was like one snapshot was every year, let's say. So it's kind of slowly building, and you can see the farms slowly turning into villages, slowly turning into city, and it's just kind of expanding. And Tehran is just growing and growing and growing. And you could see the whole thing happening, but on a time lapse, it was really kind of useful. And they said, in the beginning, it was all just arid land. It was mostly kind of brown color. You could tell it was covered in, weeds and stuff, just kind of not quite the desert, but just slightly more vegetation than the desert. I think it's called the high desert or something. And by the end, the entire thing was green. The entirety of the entire map was green.
Oh, wow.
And they said, well, the only way for them to get that much water on land, they can't get it from the ocean because the salinity is too high, and they don't have enough processing plants to get that much water. So they have to be going subterranean. They have to be going for this ancient water underneath the soil. The problem is we've done a bunch of analysis on that, and they're not going to have enough. They're going to run out.
Oh, wow.
And so the only country in the world that has the plants necessary to desalinate enough water for them to survive for how much their population has grown is Israel.
Oh, wow.
And so there's going to be some interesting conflict there at some point, or some massive humanitarian thing that has to happen at some point to feed all of those people, or like have them use those crops, because they're probably going to die if you don't do it. That's something you cannot just do from the ground. You have to be, many miles above the earth and looking down, and
to see it.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
So this is back to your municipality things. Like if you go out to Lake Austin right now, or like Travis or something, it's pretty low.
Sure.
Like much lower than when I got here, 16 years ago or something. That's something you could easily say, look, I can tell from, without doing any extra work, that you're utilizing this water faster than you're replenishing it. So you need to start doing water conservation way earlier, not 10 years from now, like right now. Like put ordinances in place now, put low water drip in place instead of sprinkler systems, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, conservation is a big part of what you can do with GIS. It helps enable all kinds of programs and initiatives. It gives you the data, and you need the data in order to do just about anything. So having a good system in place is important for that.
Mm-hmm. So you're also a partner at Next Gen VP. Is that still correct?
Yeah. So they call it a venture partner. So I don't work full time for them.
Sure.
And what that means is if I see an interesting deal or an interesting opportunity, that I can refer it into them. Mm-hmm. And they've been around for several years now, and I think they're on Fund 3.
Successful then. That's good.
Yeah. And I got involved with them pretty early, just several jobs ago. Great group of people. They've got a vast network of people who do this, or venture partners, people who can bring a deal to them, and they'll evaluate it and take a look at it. Venture partners can serve on investment committees, or invest in the fund, or invest in a deal, and then also, I've heard maybe they've been involved in portfolio companies, but it's just a great network and another way to look at like venture capital.
So what are you looking for in an entrepreneur now that you are an entrepreneur? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, well, what's fair is fair. I've done some entrepreneurial things, but I didn't start this company. I got hired in to be CEO of this company.
Okay, all right.
So I want to give credit to Tony Schreiner, who was the founder.
Okay.
Look, these things are hard, right? Building a business from scratch is really, really hard. So what you're looking for is somebody who's really motivated and has really thought this through, even though no plan survives first contact, right? Do they have the ability to recruit people or investors in a team? And is this and there's all kinds of other frameworks that you can look at, but like what's the product? What problem? What's the product that they're putting forth, and what problem is it really trying to solve? And
but specifically them
individually.
Yeah, I mean, do they have to have done it before? For instance, I've heard some mixed feelings on that particular issue.
There's some data out there, some research papers I think that show that obviously a second or serial entrepreneurs or somebody who's done it before, or a second-time founder, can have a slightly better rate of success than, and you can debate how you're going to measure success.
Sure.
But then a first-time founder, but some people just have it. They have that X factor, whatever it is. And if you can get a sense for that, then that could be part of your investment thesis or not.
Mm-hmm. And anything about their personality? Do they have to be salesmen? Do they have to be...
Yeah. So,
I mean, to me, it's like, if you can't sell me your product, why am I going to put a bunch of money into you, knowing that you're not going to be able to sell the next person either?
Yeah. So the way I think about that is there's a set of skills that have to exist. And if it's not with one person, it's got to be with someone else on the team. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of interesting books on this, but one of them you think about who is going to be the integrator, and then who's going to be the visionary. And is there somebody on the team that's really visionary and thinking about what the future is going to look like, what the product's going to look like, or how the problem is going to get solved? And then the integrator is somebody who's able to bring the other skills to the table to manage the business, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a business, and you're trying to manage a business.
And what about founders as CEOs? I mean, you're obviously the CEO, took over for the founder.
Sure.
So I've heard a lot of negative feelings about founders who remain in the CEO seat. But you also have like the Zuckerbergs of the world, and the Bezoses of the world. So clearly it can work.
Sure.
But what do you really look? Is it your impression that you should get rid of the founder and replace them pretty quickly, or do you want
definitely not.
You want the innovation there for a long time?
Yeah, and I think every case is unique, because every person is unique, and so you have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. There's no hard and fast rule for any of this, at least not from my perspective, or not from anything I've seen. Mm-hmm. And so if you have somebody, I mean, like a Zuck, I mean, he's just such a statistical anomaly, but he took it the whole way. From a dorm room to, he's still running the show. Mm-hmm. And then in other cases, you might have a founder who wants to move on and do something else, or might be burned out, or might be self-aware and say, you know what, there's someone else better to do this, or someone else better to lead this. And that's okay too. So I think you want to look at this on a case-by-case basis and make the best determination you can. And even then,
so how do you break it to them? How do you say, like, it's time? You're.
I've never had to do that.
You really? You never?
Yeah, I have not had to do that. No.
Interesting. I feel like I've had to do it a couple of times, but it's a rough conversation. And usually it's more about what's good for the company.
Yeah. And like, I'm not a full-time, I'm not a venture capitalist, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's not in my remit, if you will.
Sure. But has it informed you being a CEO and how you act as a CEO?
Yeah. I mean, I'm new to this,
Sure.
but I do believe that you want to be as self-aware as you can and be aware of your strengths, and then get good people around you and support you and can work with you in the areas where you may. Where someone else might be bringing more expertise to the table, where someone else's opinion would be better or more valuable.
Mm-hmm. And now fundraising. So now that you're on both sides of the fence, you get to see deal flow and how deals get made, but you also, I'm assuming, eventually going to have to raise a round or something, right? Unless it's just doing famously well and bootstrapped on its own or whatever. So how do you think about fundraising? What's sort of the magical point to do it, and how do you think about it?
Yeah. So the business that I'm in today is owned by an investment firm, and so the first stop would be, of course, working with the investment firm on working capital. But like if I was out just as a regular entrepreneur or building something from scratch, or even in a previous company, fundraising is hard, but it's an important part of the process, and you work through it. You start out with your vision and where you're trying to go, and try to identify who the right partners are, and you build your pitch deck, and you do your roadshow. You hit the road, and you pitch. You work through this process just like it's a sales process. It's very much a funnel, and which firms
I like the way you think about that. I've said that before to people. I think it's closer, if I had to use an exact analogy, to biz dev. Like it's almost exactly like biz dev. It's just the biz dev is getting money for your company. Yeah,
instead of selling the product. But you have to be able to communicate the vision for the product as well as part of that. It's an extremely important part of it. But there are standard pitch decks and templates out there for how to get started with this. But there's no substitute for, just like anything else in life, there's no substitute for doing the work. And then some people are going to be really great at fundraising, just like some people who are really great at sales, and then some people might not be. We had a team, and we did it as a team. So that's something that everybody's experience, I think, is going to be different.
Is there any magic sort of, this kind of company tends to have an easier go of it? If you have this makeup size or this kind of team, any sort of pointers?
I think serial entrepreneurs are probably better at this. They've done it before. They've seen the movie. They have some relationships in place. If they've got a good track record already, people are going to actually want, line up actually in some cases to invest in them if they've got a good track record or if they've done it before. So I think serial entrepreneurs probably have a better shot at it. But look, there's no shortage of first-time founders that are out doing it too, and figuring it out. Of course, now we're in a very difficult fundraising environment.
Yeah, that's a great,
from the data that I've seen.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to somebody who's just entering the market and trying to get funding now compared to a year ago, let's say? Yeah.
Well, I mean, deals are still getting done. Companies are still raising money. I think today it's going to depend very much on what it is you're doing. Is it considered, whether this is a great idea or not, whether it's considered a really hot space, and then being laser focused on who you're going after. Is this something that they invest in? Is there some relationship that you can leverage to get in front of someone, and give it your best shot, and then be open to learning and dealing with frankly the highs and lows of the process, just like any sales or BD process.
Interesting. How much of your time do you think an average CEO should be fundraising, given the fact that they're probably going to have to get their next round? Is it like a half the time? Is it a third of the time? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, during the fundraising process, the CEO is probably spending the vast majority of their time on that, and they still have to run the business. So hopefully they've got somebody else that can help them with that. Or they're able to wrap the process up pretty quickly, run a tight process, get in, get out, get what they need. But I've seen or I've heard stories of founders or CEOs spending all of their time or almost all of their time fundraising.
Wow.
And so that can be a real challenge while they're trying to build the business at the same time. I was going to say,
like, how do you manage a team if you are not there at all?
Yeah. Well,
mentally, physically.
Yeah, and none of this is easy, right?
So the Austin market in particular has always been a little bit lagging from the investment out of Silicon Valley, let's say, or even New York. Do you see that changing over time, or is it going to stay kind of weaker compared to those other two?
Well, my understanding is that it's getting much, much better, and there's new firms here. There's more money here now, and then there's a lot of new people here. And so I think part of what's still happening is we're still figuring out who's here or who's even here now. And so you have to be, or you want to be on the ground, and it kind of connected to the community of the entrepreneurs and innovators to just find out, just to get the lay of the land. And so there's newsletters and the databases and the organizations around town that you can connect with or subscribe to and find out who's here. But a lot of this is still done through introductions. It's done through networking and through good old fashioned building relationships and finding out who's here. So I think Austin's is a great place, and it's gotten, depending on how you look at it, from my perspective, the technology community's grown pretty substantially. There's now offices here, or satellite offices here, for many really, really large organizations.
Yes.
And when
almost all of them.
Everybody's got a presence here now.
Yep.
And when they go through things like layoffs, where do those people go?
Right.
Yeah, they stay here. A lot of them will stay here and hopefully look for a startup here in town, or look for another opportunity here in Austin.
Yep.
And that could be really great for startups and for the community here in Austin.
When I was fundraising this last time, I barely even thought about Austin. I mean, I know a couple of firms. I just bypassed them entirely and spent all my time on, up in the Santa Clara area. Sand Hill Road is what I meant to say. But I get the feeling, I think Austin Ventures was kind of an interesting kind of tipping point in Austin's history, where it was obviously the big boy in the block. It was obviously just killing it and way ahead of everybody else. And then the way I understand it is it got so big, a lot of the venture partners, they're like, I can bring in an enormous deal and it will not move the needle at all. And so from their perspective, it was actually just better to leave and start their own fund. So it kind of ended up being a seedling for a lot of other funds.
Yeah.
And I think that was, at least as far as I can tell, was the big tipping point for now. We probably got 50 VCs in town or something.
Yeah. So one started out and then spawned or branched all these other firms that are here now.
Yeah.
And I think that's necessary. And now imagine if this happens again.
Right.
So if you have, let's say there's 50 and partners eventually separate and go start their own firms, several years from now, hopefully you've got 150 firms here. Mm-hmm. Then you've got a much larger community and a much larger pool, hopefully, of money to put into opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm kind of excited to see what happens. I don't currently need money for anything, but I'm always curious to see what the deal flow looks like in Austin, and how the talent's working, and how they're getting financed in general. A lot of these people are still bootstrapping, which I think is interesting. Like, the longer you can hang on, the better. And so it's kind of fun to watch companies struggle at the beginning, and then all of a sudden they're like, "We're too big. We gotta go to that next level." And so that's a fun one. So I know leadership means a lot to you in particular, and how you manage your team. And we talked a lot about this, having some top-down view into all of these organizations. But do you have any feelings on, like, how should I lead a company? Like, how should I walk in and get things done? Is it with the stick or the carrot, or like what's your leadership style? How would you characterize that?
Sure. Yeah. I think my style is goal and results oriented. And I look at my role as that of the facilitator, and the CEO has specific responsibilities.
You're the referee. Are they fighting in your office?
No. And we're mostly virtual.
That's good.
Fighting on Teams. No. That's not us at all. And the CEO's got responsibilities. So managing performance, setting the vision, owning the culture, and then working with the rest of the team to bring out the best in them and to achieve whatever objectives you've set out, and to really realize your mission, and to pursue your mission. Mm-hmm. And so I stay focused on those things. Do you think
mission is an important thing in a company? Should you always have a mission?
Yeah, I think you should have a mission. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if you're just doing exploratory things like some other startup just getting off the ground, they have some reason they're coming together to do whatever it is they're doing, or even if it's just one person. So what problem is it that you're trying to solve? And then your mission becomes solving that problem, or maybe solving that problem at scale, or seeing if that's a real problem to solve. Mm-hmm. And that might be the first step in the process. Oh, hey, I have a hypothesis about this problem. I'm going to go out and test it now. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go out and see if this is really a problem. And if it's a problem, how many people does it impact, or how many organizations or companies does it impact? Is it a real big problem? If it's a big problem, you get a big opportunity. So then that could be your mission, is to figure
Sure.
that out at that stage.
Yeah, I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole. Like, I'm pretty sure this idea is going to work. A buddy of mine is like, hey, is there a way to find these sort of hidden funds, like the elephant fund, for instance, these massive mega funds? They have like 43% returns or something, like massive, but only billionaires are in them. And I'm like, oh, maybe I've got some data I could try to figure out. So I went through and I created this model, and I found a whole bunch of companies that didn't want anyone to know they existed, and yet were definitely funds, and were operational. And so I took it to a trader, this very, very high-end trader, like one of the best in the world. And I'm like, so what am I looking at here? Is this good data? He's like, Robert, you did not find what you think you found. These are a whole bunch of drug dealers and terrorists, and like this should go to the government immediately. This is not a trading strategy. So much for that business idea. But that's the kind of thing. Like,
where were you poking around?
All over the place. But that's the kind of thing where you're like, is this real? Is this thesis real? And you have to vet it, and you have to find smarter people than you who really know what they're looking at to make sure that you're not crazy. Or maybe this idea was a good one. You just found something other than what you thought you found. Yeah.
And I mean, there's a number of techniques for it, but there's no like one size fits all answer for whether or not it's going to work. And so given that context, I think you want to go figure out whether or not your problem is the problem that you think you're going to, or whether or not enough people or organizations or companies have the problem.
Right. And
then if they have the problem, like, how big is the marketplace? And then if it's a really, really large addressable market, then you've got an opportunity. Or if it's a growing market, our industry is a growing industry, that's a good sign. That means people are going to be spending money in that domain or in that industry, and that's a good indication. It's one of the questions your investors are going to ask. What's the size of the market, total addressable market, serviceable market? And you want to be able to like talk through that and answer those questions.
So back to your leadership. So let's say you have a conflict, like somebody comes in, they have opinion A, another person comes in, they have opinion B. Like, how do you, obviously not your office since it's virtual, but how do you, I use a Socratic method. Like, how do you sort through that?
Yeah, very similar. You want to engage with each employee, find out what their position is. And then if we can't come to a consensus, someone has to be the decision maker. And sorting out issues among the team is like the manager, or if it's a small organization like ours, like that might fall to me depending on who it is. And so someone actually has to make a decision at the end of the day.
That is one of the major reasons I tell people, if you're going to build a company, don't with a partner, don't split it down the middle 50-50. Give someone 51%. I don't care how you figure out who that person is. That's not relevant, but someone has to make that final decision, and that someone has to be able to say, we're going to sell this company like 5 years too early. And the other person's like, no, we can make so much money. No, we're doing it. This is a better decision in the long term. We got to do it. And I've got the ability, because if you're in stalemate and neither can get anywhere, you're going to end up with so much conflict.
Sure.
I do really like the idea of empowering people to make their own decisions.
Yeah. Wherever possible, you want to delegate.
Yeah.
And then let your team do what your team does.
Right.
And they have expertise in that specific area for a reason. And trust them to, as long as they've done the right things up until that point, you trust them to make the right choices and make the right decisions. And some of them will be right and some of them won't, but you'll work as a team to figure it out. And then if you got a little system or a process, then you can see ahead of time where things aren't going right and hopefully get out ahead of it.
Right. Yeah.
We used to call it managing the future.
Yeah. So getting ahead of these massive problems because you have enough people, enough expertise to say, here's what's going on. Here's where we're going.
Or the teams that we're working together. I don't think it's necessarily a function of how many people, but if they have the right visibility and the right tools and they know what's going on, then they can surface where there's going to be a problem.
How do you deal with the marketing and sales conflict? Because you mentioned it, and this is a common topic on this podcast, actually. Sales hates marketing. Marketing thinks sales is not putting things into Salesforce correctly, and they just cannot get along. They're cats and dogs.
Yeah, you got to have a good mix between the head of sales and the head of marketing. Like you want them to you want them to get along. You want them to work well together, but to be able to essentially have like the psychological safety and the ability to push back against one another where necessary, without it becoming detrimental. And then
how do you do that?
Yeah,
and how do you know that they're doing their job?
Yeah, so I mean, just like any other role, you might look at service level like agreements or obligations internally, and so are the two teams working well together? Have they agreed on how we're going to measure things, and where they can?
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I don't hear people talking about that. So mostly, it's like, here's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Here's your data.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And wait, this
and
data's
work
all messed
together.
up, and like this isn't helpful at all. This is tracking something I don't care about.
Yeah, and then have open dialogue and standard definitions about what things mean, and
I like that.
What's in the dashboard, and do you define a marketing qualified lead the same way, and then what's the feedback loop? There has to be some sort of feedback loop to both of them so that they're on the same page, or so that they're working together.
I really like that. Yeah, I've not heard sales come up with a whole lot of great answers. It's mostly just to give us more money. Like basically get rid of marketing, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah.
It's just not the right answer.
Well, probably not today, no.
Yeah.
I mean, the world's changed considerably, and both functions are absolutely critical. I don't know how you get by without them.
Right. Yeah, I don't either. Although I had a very good sales guy on the podcast a little bit ago, Kyle Kephart, and he said, well, basically I have to be able to sell around the product's deficiencies. That's my job, because if it worked perfectly, you wouldn't need me.
Right.
And what that seems to me is that the better we get at product development, the less I'm going to need sales, to the point where I don't need them at all. And then you get into companies and business models where there is no support line, there is no people. It's just completely automated. You swipe a credit card and you get access, and it's off to the races.
That's it.
Like, I don't remember the last time I've talked with an AWS, representative or something. They just swipe a credit card and now you have access to servers. So I think there is something to that. Yeah,
product. And I've heard this said that marketing is there when the product's not perfect, and then sales is there when marketing is not perfect, and so you kind of keep going down the line, right? So build a great product, and you'll need hopefully you would need less of both.
Yeah, probably. All right. Well, where can people find out more about your company and you and get a hold of you?
Sure, we are at imgis.com or imgis.net, and then I am on LinkedIn. It's the best place to find me. Chris Palmisano, Palmisano.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming all the way down.
You got it.